Tonight, we drift back to the cobblestone streets, crowded factories, and faint smell of coal smoke to discover what life was really like in America in the early 1900s. You open your eyes to a soft haze of morning light seeping through thin curtains. The year is somewhere around 1905, though nobody in this household is marking time with the kind of precision you're used to. A rooster crows down the block, which seems quaint until you realize that sound means you're already late for work. And just so you know, you probably won't make it through this day. But don't worry, no one else will either, and they'll keep doing it all over again tomorrow. Before we step outside, let me remind you, if you're enjoying this little journey into dusty corners of history, please do like and subscribe. It helps keep these sleepy tales drifting along. And while you're here, drop a comment below. Where are you listening from? And what time is it right now where you are? It's always a strange comfort to imagine all of us scattered across time zones, sharing this quiet moment together. Now let's ease into tonight's journey. The mattress beneath you is stuffed with straw, lumpy in all the wrong places. If you're wealthy enough, you get springs. If you're middle class, you get hay. And if you're poor, you get the floor. This is a time when bedrooms are multipurpose. They're for sleeping, yes, but also sewing, mending, even storing food when the kitchen gets too warm. Privacy is a luxury word that doesn't really belong in 1905. You swing your feet to the floorboards, wooden, creaky, and covered in dust. You smell coal smoke, the universal perfume of industrial America. It clings to clothes, furniture, and the insides of people's lungs. Historians agree that cities like New York and Chicago were wrapped in a gray haze most days, but they still debate whether ordinary people were more annoyed by the smell or more accepting of it as just part of life. You shuffle to the wash basin. The water is cold, sharp on the skin. There's soap if you can afford it, but sometimes soap is reserved for laundry rather than people. Teeth brushing? Well, that's an option. Some used baking soda, others salt, and some just rinsed and hoped for the best. Toothpaste, as you know, it won't be mass-marketed until later. And you thought your morning routine felt rushed. Here's a fact to tuck under your pillow. By 1900, only about 10% of American homes had indoor plumbing, which means 9 out of 10 households managed with outhouses or chamber pots. And if you're wondering about the smell, yes, it was exactly as bad as you imagine. Life in the early 1900s is full of contrasts. Automobiles rumbling down city streets next to horse-drawn wagons. Electric lights glowing downtown while kerosene lamps flicker in farmhouses. Remember that street you'll walk down later? Half of it will be paved, the other half mud. That's progress in action. Food is simple, hearty, and repetitive. Breakfast this morning might be oatmeal, molasses bread, and coffee so strong it doubles as paint thinner. Milk isn't guaranteed to be safe unless you boil it. Pasteurization exists, but not everyone trusts it. Ironically, they'd rather risk disease than what they suspect is unnatural milk. Human decision-making hasn't improved much in a century. Has it? Your clothes scratch. Wool, linen, and cotton dominate the wardrobe. Polyester hasn't even been dreamed of. And fashion is a social announcement. A stiff collar tells the world you're respectable. A frayed hem tells it you're tired. Women cinch waists with corsets, though many secretly loosen the laces when no one's looking. Men starch their collars to a degree that makes swallowing an act of bravery. The streets are alive by the time you step outside. Streetcars rattle along iron tracks, sparks flying from the overhead wires. A child with bare feet chases a hoop. Vendors shout from corners, hawking hot chestnuts, newspapers, or apples that may or may not be fresh. Horses clop and snort, leaving evidence behind for someone else to step in. The city has smells you can't ignore: coal smoke, manure, bread baking, sewage, perfume. A bizarre soup of odor that, over time, simply becomes home. Obscure tidbit for you. In some neighborhoods, pigs still roam freely in alleys, eating trash and scraps. They're basically the municipal waste system with hooves. Some cities tried to ban them, but poor residents resisted. Pigs were efficient recyclers before the term eco-friendly ever existed. The working day is calling. Factory whistles blow like alarm clocks for the masses. Some people work 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. Labor laws exist on paper, but in reality, children as young as 10 still crawl into machines to oil gears. Adults work until their lungs give out. Rest days are rare. Entertainment is rationed into scraps. A vaudeville show, a church picnic, or a brass band in the park. It's not all misery, though. Families gather around phonographs, marveling at scratchy voices captured in tinny sound. Couples stroll arm in arm on Sunday promenades, showing off new hats and gloves. Baseball is rising as America's favorite pastime. And if you're really daring, you might sneak into a Nickelodeon theater to watch silent films flicker in the dark. An entire universe of shadows and imagination for just 5 cents. The air is filled with possibility and exhaustion in equal measure. You feel it in your bones as you walk. The sense that something grand is happening here in the United States of the early 1900s. Skyscrapers climbing higher, railroads stretching wider, inventions buzzing louder. But beneath it all, the simple truth remains. Most people are just trying to make it through the day without collapsing. And you, of course, won't. But don't worry, you'll drift off long before then. The factory hums before you even step inside. The building looms, brick and smoke-stained, with windows rattling from the machinery within. The air outside already tastes metallic, like iron filings mixed with dust. You push open the heavy door, and the sound crashes over you. Clanking, hissing, the whir of belts and gears. This is industrial America at its peak. By 1910, the United States is producing more steel than Britain and Germany combined. That's your major historical fact for this section. The empire of iron and smoke isn't built quietly. It's built with noise, sweat, and endless repetition. You find your station, which is essentially a stool and a machine that never sleeps. 12 hours of tightening bolts or stamping metal or threading cloth. You do it over and over until your hands no longer feel like your own. There's no music, no radio, no distraction beyond the occasional shout of a foreman. You measure your day in meals. A tin pail of bread and cold meat at noon, maybe an apple if you're lucky. And here's a weird little cultural tidbit. Many factories employed singing girls, women hired specifically to sing to keep up morale and drown out the monotony. They weren't paid much, but their job was literally to make sure the workers didn't fall asleep at their machines. Your modern playlist suddenly feels luxurious, doesn't it? Safety is questionable at best. Guards on machines are rare, accidents common. Historians still debate whether owners truly believed workers didn't need protection, or whether they simply ignored the risks to save costs. Either way, you keep your fingers tucked carefully away, because losing one doesn't guarantee compensation. At the day's end, you stumble out into twilight, covered in dust and sweat. The city greets you again, as loud and chaotic as before. You walk past saloons spilling laughter and shouting onto the street. Temperance advocates hand out pamphlets warning of alcohol's evils, but judging by the crowd inside, the pamphlets aren't winning. Dinner is simple: stew, bread, maybe a slice of pie if there's extra. Families eat together, the table crowded and the portions sometimes thin. Afterward, you might sit by the lamplight, mending socks or reading aloud from a dime novel. The words blur, but they're enough to carry you out of yourself for a while. Children play outside until the last traces of daylight vanish. A boy rolls a hoop, a girl skips rope, their laughter mingling with the clatter of horse hooves. You remember that street you crossed this morning? It's quieter now, but the ruts in the dirt are deeper, filled with puddles reflecting the faint glow of gas lamps. As the night deepens, homes settle into silence. The city doesn't sleep, but it does sigh. A sense of exhaustion hangs in the air, mingling with the coal smoke. You lie down again, the straw mattress scratchy, the pillow thin. Your body aches from the day, but your mind drifts. You think about skyscrapers climbing into the clouds, railroads stitching the continent, inventions promising brighter futures. But tonight, your world is small. A bed, a roof, and the faint promise of rest before the rooster calls again. And with that thought, you sink into the early 1900s version of sleep. Uneasy, crowded, but deeply earned. The morning begins not with a gentle alarm clock, but with the rude intrusion of a factory whistle shrieking across the rooftops, reminding you that industrial America doesn't care about your dreams. You rise, not refreshed, but resigned. The mattress feels flatter than ever, the straw shifting under your weight like an unsympathetic pet. You wash your face in cold water again. There's no hot tap waiting for you, just a pitcher and basin, and you notice the soap shrinking to a stub. It smells faintly medicinal, like lye mixed with something pretending to be lavender. Historians still debate whether ordinary Americans in 1900 were especially dirtier than their European counterparts, or whether they simply had fewer options for consistent bathing. Either way, you're not fresh, and neither is anyone else. Breakfast is oatmeal, thick and lukewarm, maybe sweetened with molasses if fortune favors you. Coffee is boiled black, bitter enough to curl the edges of your nerves. This is fuel, not pleasure. You chew, sip, swallow, and already think of dinner before you've even begun the day. The streets outside hum with activity. Vendors call out about fresh bread, though fresh is sometimes a flexible term. The newsboys shout the headlines. A fire, a strike, a political scandal. You recognize none of the names, but the tone feels urgent, desperate, as though you should be worried. That sense of permanent urgency is what makes the early 1900s both thrilling and exhausting. Now you walk toward the trolley line. Streetcars clatter and spark, pulled along with a mix of electricity and determination. A nickel buys you passage, though many people still choose to walk to save the coin. The car is crowded, bodies pressed together, hats tilted, voices blending into a soup of chatter. The smell is a mixture of leather, sweat, and the faint scent of coal smoke sneaking in from the outside. Here's your historical fact of the day. By 1910, more than half of Americans lived in urban areas. The farm may be America's romantic ideal, but the reality is cities swelling, tenements rising, and neighborhoods bursting at the seams. Speaking of neighborhoods, you glance out the trolley window and notice the strange juxtapositions. Immigrant enclaves cluster tightly. Italians on one block, Irish on another, German butchers advertising in bold letters, Jewish bakeries filling the street with the scent of halal. Children switch languages mid-sentence without even realizing it, their voices bright and fast. And here's an obscure tidbit. Some immigrant neighborhoods in cities like New York and Chicago posted street signs in multiple languages. English alongside Yiddish, Italian, or Polish, so residents wouldn't get lost in their own communities. A simple reminder that multilingual chaos is not just a modern phenomenon. The trolley rattles to a stop, and you step off into a city alive with contradictions. Wealthy families stroll with parasols, their gloves pristine. Laborers trudge with lunch pails, collars stained. A horse pulls a wagon stacked with blocks of ice, while another hauls barrels of beer. You remember that street you trudged down yesterday? It's here again, but now full of shouting vendors and clanging hammers as someone lays new track. Progress always seems to come with noise. As the day drags on, you notice how much of life revolves around work. Men file into factories, women into laundries or shops, children darting between. But beyond the grind, there's a quiet rebellion. The search for leisure. On your lunch break, you wander past a small park. A brass band plays, men tilt their hats back, women fan themselves, and for a fleeting moment, the city feels less harsh. Dinner that night is stew again, heavy with potatoes and onions. Meat is occasional, often stretched thin. If you're lucky, dessert is rice pudding, dusted with cinnamon. And here's the irony, you're more likely to get dessert than vegetables. Nutrition science isn't exactly advanced yet. The evening ends with entertainment. Maybe it's the flickering of a Nickelodeon film, showing silent actors gesturing wildly. Maybe it's a vaudeville stage, offering comedy sketches, juggling, and a magician pulling a rabbit from a hat. The laughter feels genuine, even if it's just a brief escape. By the time you return home, exhaustion weighs heavier than your coat. You crawl into bed again, the straw rustling. The sounds of the city seep through the thin walls. Trolley bells, distant laughter, a baby crying, a horse stamping. You close your eyes and drift, not peacefully but out of necessity. Tomorrow will come again, ready or not. The morning greets you with rain. The streets outside glisten with puddles, and the air smells like wet coal. The gutters overflow, carrying scraps of paper, vegetable peelings, and the occasional unlucky rat. You sigh and tug on your boots, already bracing yourself for mud. Breakfast is bread thick with butter if you can afford it, or just dry bread if you can't. Coffee steams, but the warmth is fleeting as you step outside and feel the chill seep into your bones. Here's your historical fact for this section. By 1907, the Model T Ford was introduced, beginning the automobile revolution. But in your world right now, cars are still rare curiosities. Most people use feet, trolleys, or horses. Imagine walking down the street and spotting one shiny motorcar between a dozen carts. It would feel futuristic and ridiculous at once, like spotting a spaceship parked at the corner store today. The rain makes everything slower. Horses splash through puddles, wagons creak and groan. Children leap across streams of water in the street. Umbrellas bloom, black and awkward, tilting against the wind. But the city doesn't stop. Factories still roar, offices still hum, shops still open. Life in the early 1900s is relentless in its forward motion. Inside a department store, you find a different world. Bright lights, electric. If the store is modern, shine on polished counters. Clerks in crisp uniforms bow slightly as they ask what you need. Glass cases display hats, gloves, perfumes, and bolts of fabric. It feels almost luxurious, even if you don't buy anything. And here's an obscure tidbit. Many department stores of the era offered tea rooms, allowing women to shop without needing a male escort. For some women, this was their first taste of independence in public life. Shopping and dining without a husband or brother hovering nearby. Small freedoms, stitched into everyday errands. Back outside, The rain eases into drizzle. You pass the library, a grand building with stone steps and towering columns. Carnegie libraries are popping up across America, funded by steel magnate Andrew Carnegie, who believed in giving the public free access to knowledge. Inside, it smells of paper and dust, a scent oddly comforting. People sit in silence, reading newspapers, leafing through books, or simply drying off. You walk back into the streets, and here's where uncertainty slips in. Historians still debate how much leisure time working-class Americans truly had. Was reading a luxury of the middle class, or did factory workers also sneak novels under their pillows at night? The truth is probably somewhere in the gray middle ground. By evening, you're tired of the dampness. Dinner is soup thin, hot, and just filling enough to fight the hunger. You sit with family or friends, sharing bread and stories of the day. Laughter punctuates the weariness, because humor is always cheaper than despair. The lamps are lit, casting a golden glow across the room. You hear music faintly drifting from a neighbor's phonograph. A scratchy waltz, distant but soothing. Children drowse, heads nodding, before being carried to bed. Adults linger, sipping tea or beer, stretching the day as long as they can before tomorrow steals it again. As you lie down, the rain taps against the roof, a steady lullaby. You remember the muddy street you crossed this morning. It's still there, still slick, still waiting for you tomorrow. But for now, you let the sound wash over you, the rhythm slow and gentle. You drift, not because the day was easy, but because sleep is the only true luxury left. The morning begins with a sound you've grown used to but never really enjoy. The uneven clatter of hoofbeats on cobblestones outside your window. Horses are the backbone of this city in the early 1900s. They haul wagons, carriages, ice carts, and milk deliveries, leaving behind, well, let's say not everything they leave behind is wholesome. You step outside, and the air greets you with a sour-sweet smell that no perfume of the time can hide. Breakfast today is simple. Cornmeal mush with a splash of syrup, eaten quickly before the day takes hold of you. You notice how meals always seem to feel more like fuel than indulgence. If you're lucky, there's bacon, but the portions are modest. It's the early 1900s, calories are counted in pennies, not grams. Here's your historical fact. In 1901, President William McKinley was assassinated, and Theodore Roosevelt took office. Roosevelt embodied the new century's energy, bounding into politics with reformist zeal. But for you, as an ordinary person, the assassination probably meant little more than another headline shouted by a newsboy. Life went on. Your rent didn't suddenly shrink because the president had changed. You walk down the street and notice the pharmacies, or apothecaries, displaying patent medicines. Bottles promise to cure everything from headaches to female complaints. Most are just mixtures of alcohol, sugar, and occasionally cocaine. That's your obscure tidbit. Yes, Coca-Cola originally contained coca leaf extract, and people actually believed it was medicinal. A morning pick-me-up with a kick stronger than caffeine. The trolley ride feels familiar now, crowded with men clutching lunch pails and women with baskets. You overhear conversations about wages, about strikes, about bosses who never seem to smile. The labor movement is rumbling beneath the surface, and though not everyone is political, everyone feels the weight of the hours. Midday brings you to a doctor's office. Not because you're sick, but because you're curious. The waiting room smells faintly of disinfectant, though not nearly strong enough to inspire confidence. Instruments glint coldly, and you wonder how clean they really are. Sterilization exists, yes, but antiseptic practices are still inconsistent. Historians still debate how widespread good hygiene truly was in medical practice at this time. Your doctor prescribes rest, or maybe a tonic, or maybe just good luck. You leave lighter in the pocket, but not necessarily healthier. The evening settles with more noise than peace. Children shriek in the alleyways, couples argue in the stairwells, and someone cranks a phonograph too loudly. Dinner is beans and bread with maybe a scrap of pork for flavor. It tastes humble but honest. Before bed, you glance at a newspaper and read about the Wright brothers' flight in 1903. The idea of humans actually flying seems absurd and thrilling, like a circus trick that might actually work. You shake your head, wondering if it will ever really matter to people like you. You crawl into bed, and once again, the mattress feels like a sack of promises that never came true. Sleep comes slowly, tugged forward by exhaustion, while outside, the horses never quite stop clattering. The next morning greets you with sunlight spilling through a grimy window. Dust motes drift lazily in the air, almost beautiful if you squint hard enough. The smell of yesterday's stew still lingers in the room, blending with the sharper scent of coal smoke wafting in from the street. Breakfast is eggs if fortune smiles, but most likely it's just toast with jam. Coffee steams in a chipped mug. You sip slowly, savoring the small comfort. Here's today's historical fact. In the early 1900s, life expectancy in the United States hovered around 50 years for men, 54 for women. Diseases like tuberculosis, pneumonia, and influenza were constant threats. You don't plan for a long life, you plan for the day, maybe the week if you're lucky. You walk to work and pass a barber shop, striped pole spinning. Inside, men lean back in chairs while barbers wield straight razors with unnerving confidence. A shave is quick, cheap, and often more hygienic than attempting it yourself in a dim bathroom. Women pass by the shop too, hurrying toward dressmakers' shops or laundry work. And here's your obscure tidbit. In some urban neighborhoods, public baths were available for a small fee, offering hot water, soap, and a clean towel. For families without indoor plumbing, this was luxury. Entire households sometimes bathed together, not out of intimacy, but out of practicality. Imagine your evening spa day, but with 10 strangers in a tiled room. The streets grow livelier as you reach the main thoroughfare. Posters plastered to walls advertise plays, vaudeville shows, and moving pictures. Some are hand-drawn, their ink already smudging from the rain earlier in the week. You pause, reading the exaggerated promises of entertainment, the greatest comedy ever shown, and smile. Marketing hype isn't new. Midday finds you at the market, where fishmongers shout, butchers slice, and fruit sellers pile their wares into pyramids. The smell is overwhelming, an orchestra of brine, meat, and ripe bananas. Children dart between legs, chasing stray apples that tumble onto the ground. Feels chaotic, messy, but alive. Scholars still debate how much food safety mattered to the average consumer at this time. Refrigeration was limited, inspection inconsistent. You bought what you could see, smell, or trust, and hoped your stomach was stronger than the germs. The day closes with small joys. A neighbor lends you a newspaper cartoon, hand-drawn and witty, mocking some politician. Another neighbor hums a folk tune as she mends socks on the stoop. You smile at the ordinariness of it all. Dinner is hash, leftovers chopped, fried, and stretched. The taste is comforting, reminding you that waste is the enemy of survival here. Afterward, you sip tea or cheap beer, watching the last light fade from the rooftops. And as night falls, you recall the public bathhouse you passed earlier. Maybe tomorrow you'll try it. For now, you lie back on your lumpy mattress, listening to the faint clatter of horses, the hum of trolley wires, and the lull of a city that never truly rests. Sleep drifts over you, and once again, the new century carries you quietly into another uncertain day. The morning begins earlier than you would like, with the sound of a milk wagon stopping at the corner. Glass bottles clink, a steady rhythm of dairy commerce. You pull yourself from bed, shoulders stiff from a mattress that seems designed more for survival than comfort. The day has already started, whether you approve or not. Breakfast is the same routine. Toast if you're lucky, porridge if you're not. Children rush about, their laughter mixing with complaints about school books and chores. In the early 1900s, education is spreading, though it's not universal. Many kids leave school after just a few years to help earn money for the household. That's your fact of the day. By 1910, about 72% of American children were enrolled in school, but many never made it past the 8th grade. You walk with the children down the street, noticing the one-room schoolhouse at the edge of the neighborhood. A bell rings, its clang sharp and insistent. Students file inside, wooden desks squeaking as they settle. The teacher, often a young woman barely older than her pupils, commands the room with chalk and patience. The alphabet hangs in cursive letters along the wall, stern and decorative, reminding everyone of the shape of civilization. Obscure tidbit time. Some schools enforced penmanship contests, where students were judged not only on spelling and grammar but on the beauty of their handwriting. Imagine being told your future job prospects depended on how elegant your capital Q looked. You sigh with relief that keyboards now save us from such fates. The day stretches forward, filled with work and the thrum of the city. You pass sewing shops where women bend over machines, needles clicking in monotonous rhythm. Inside homes, wives juggle cooking, washing, and child-rearing without pause. Gender roles are sturdy walls, keeping people in place. Women are angels of the home, while men are breadwinners. But the walls aren't entirely solid. Suffrage marches begin to make noise in city streets, banners fluttering in the wind. Women in modest dresses and determined expressions call for the vote, and though you admire their energy, you wonder if it will really happen in your lifetime. Historians still debate how much everyday women cared for suffrage at the time. It may have felt distant from the daily struggles of laundry and rent. Evening brings some relief. Families gather for stories, hymns, or perhaps a piano if one is lucky enough to own it. Entertainment isn't just for theaters. It happens in living rooms, lit by gas lamps and punctuated by laughter. You might even hear a child recite a poem, proud and trembling in equal measure. As you drift to bed, the faint echo of a suffragist song lingers in your mind. Change is coming, slow but steady, like a tide you can't quite see but feel in your bones. The next morning, you wake to something unusual. Silence. No wagon wheels, no clattering hoofbeats. The city feels paused, as though the world is holding its breath. You step outside and realize it's Sunday. Sunday in the early 1900s is for church. Bells ring from steeples, calling the faithful. You follow the crowd, men in stiff collars and women in hats decorated with feathers. Children tug at gloves, already restless. Inside, wooden pews creak under the weight of the congregation, and the air smells faintly of polished wood and perfume. Your historical fact: the early 1900s saw a surge in church attendance in America, partly due to the social gospel movement, which tied faith to social reform. Churches weren't just for worship, they were hubs for community, charity, and activism. After the service, you linger outside where vendors sell penny candy and roasted peanuts. Children laugh, women chat, men discuss politics with the seriousness of philosophers. One man brags about his new automobile, though most still rely on horse and trolley. You watch the shiny machine roll past, slow but impressive, smelling faintly of gasoline. Here's your obscure tidbit. Many states had blue laws that restricted activities on Sundays. In some places, you couldn't buy alcohol or even certain types of goods. The idea was to preserve Sabbath rest, though you suspect it simply made Sunday afternoons more boring for everyone. The day drifts lazily. Families gather for Sunday dinners, roasts if they can afford them, stews if not. Food feels more plentiful today, portions larger, as though the week's hunger deserves one grand meal. You sit at the table, the sound of clinking silverware a quiet symphony of contentment. Afternoons are for leisure. Men stroll to the park, women read magazines, children fly kites or chase hoops. Newspapers print moralizing editorials about how leisure should be spent wisely, perhaps with Bible study or wholesome recreation. You smile at the irony of advice that feels as exhausting as work itself. Evening falls and gas lamps flicker on. Families gather again, perhaps for hymn singing, perhaps to listen to a father's story of his own childhood. Life feels simple, though simplicity carries its own weight. Historians still debate how restful Sundays really were for women, since preparing the large meal and managing children was hardly leisure. For men, perhaps it was a Sabbath. For women, it might have just been another shift. You lie in bed, listening to the silence return, the city holding itself in a softer rhythm for one day. Tomorrow, the noise will resume. But tonight, you let yourself drift into the quiet. The week begins again with the clang of factory bells, sharp and metallic, summoning workers like a modern church service, except the gods here are steam, steel, and profit. You walk toward the factory district, where smokestacks exhale gray columns into the sky. The air tastes of coal and iron. Inside the mill, it is hot, crowded, and noisy. Machines clatter endlessly, belts spin, and hammers strike with a rhythm so constant it begins to feel like the city's heartbeat. Men, women, and children bend to their tasks, fingers nimble, backs bent. Workdays stretch 10, sometimes 12 hours, 6 days a week. And here's your historical fact. In 1900, nearly 2 million children under 16 were employed in the United States, many in dangerous factory jobs. You pause to watch a boy no older than 8 feeding threads into a loom. His hands move quickly, almost invisibly, while his bare feet grip the wooden floor. He looks up once, and you catch the hollowness of his gaze. Childhood traded for wages. You shiver. Obscure tidbit. Some factories employed breaker boys, children who spent long days picking rocks out of coal and dusty, suffocating conditions. Their faces were perpetually blackened, except for the pale streaks under their eyes where tears washed through soot. Imagine trying to explain that as a summer internship. A foreman shouts, his voice cutting over the machines. Wages are low, rules are strict, and accidents are common. There's no workers' comp, no safety net, just a shrug and a replacement if someone is injured. And yet, there is defiance brewing. Workers whisper of unions, of strikes, of the power of many against the few. The newspapers report riots in steel towns, where laborers demand 8-hour workdays and safer conditions. Historians still debate how effective these early strikes were, but for the workers, even failure meant dignity. By late afternoon, the whistle blows, and the tide of workers floods back into the streets. Faces are grim, shoulders hunched, but there's a strange relief in the shared misery. Together, they march home like weary soldiers, carrying their exhaustion into kitchens and boarding houses. The evening brings a quieter rhythm. Soup ladled into bowls, bread broken, the chatter of survival. Someone jokes about how at least the machines never get tired. And everyone laughs because it's true, and because sometimes laughter is the only rebellion. You drift into sleep that night with the factory's hum still in your ears. Even dreams seem powered by steam. Morning again, but today you turn your steps toward a different part of the city. The streets where laborers who don't work in factories gather. You pass the docks, where men haul crates under the watchful eyes of bosses with clipboards. The smell of salt and tar mixes with sweat. Ships groan against their moorings, carrying goods that make the city run. Nearby, construction crews are raising new buildings, brick by brick, steel beam by steel beam. The city is growing upward and outward, reshaping itself every day. One worker calls out, his voice ragged but proud. Skyscrapers, he says, are the future. Your historical fact. The early 1900s saw the birth of the skyscraper, with steel frame construction allowing buildings to climb higher than ever before. Cities like New York and Chicago became vertical jungles almost overnight. Not every job is as dramatic. Street sweepers push their brooms. Vendors shout about their wares. Icemen carry heavy blocks door to door. Horses pull wagons of milk, coal, and produce. The rhythm of commerce never stops. Here's an obscure tidbit. Ice delivery was so common that children would sometimes sneak chunks from the back of the wagon in summer, eating them like candy, though often covered in dust, horsehair, and worse. You can almost hear the sarcastic slogan, "Nothing says refreshment like coal dust." Labor here is visible, sweaty, raw. Men wipe their foreheads, women adjust baskets on their hips, children dart in and out of alleys. Not all jobs are paid in cash. Sometimes it's food, shelter, or just the promise of being allowed to return the next day. Yet amid the drudgery, there's a sense of purpose. Work, after all, means survival, and survival in this era is precarious. Families measure each week in coins carefully counted on kitchen tables. Rent comes due, food prices fluctuate, and one missed paycheck could unravel everything. Historians still debate how secure working-class families really felt, whether life was seen as stable or permanently on the edge. Evening descends, and the city glows with gas lamps. Workers crowd into saloons, spending precious pennies on beer, laughter, and brief escape. Inside, voices rise, songs break out, and smoke curls thick in the air. It's noisy, rough, and strangely alive. You lean against the bar, watching as men debate politics, women trade stories, and musicians coax tired fiddles into hopeful tunes. Outside, the night carries the sound of footsteps, wagons, and an occasional whistle from a policeman making rounds. The world feels both harsh and vibrant, like a song that demands too much of its singers but still manages to be sung. You go to bed that night with calluses in your mind, your body aching with the day's labors, and the odd thought that tomorrow, though just as hard, will come anyway. The morning sunlight slants across a narrow kitchen, catching the glint of tin pots and cast-iron skillets. You're sitting at a wooden table, the kind that's been scrubbed so many times its grain has grown pale and splintered. The smell is unmistakable. Bread, coffee, and maybe bacon, though for most families, bacon is an occasional luxury. More often it's oatmeal, cornbread, or potatoes, reheated from the night before. Here's your historical fact. In 1900, the average American diet was far heavier on bread, potatoes, and pork than today, with fresh fruits and vegetables far less common unless you lived near a farm. Milk was delivered daily, sometimes questionable in quality, while sugar and canned goods were steadily rising in popularity. Breakfast is a family affair, though a hurried one. Fathers gulp their coffee before rushing to work. Mothers juggle feeding children while planning meals that must stretch ingredients to their limit. Kids, if they're lucky, grab a heel of bread before school or before heading to their own jobs. And now for a curious tidbit. Gelatin desserts, especially those made with early versions of Jell-O, were considered dazzlingly modern at the turn of the century. Housewives proudly served wobbly, jewel-colored molds at dinner parties. Imagine your pride resting on whether dessert jiggles correctly. As you wander through the neighborhood, you notice food vendors on nearly every corner. Pushcarts sell hot pretzels, pickles from barrels, roasted chestnuts, and oysters, a cheap and popular snack at the time. Yes, oysters were once as common as potato chips. Somewhere, an oyster bar is crying over what could have been. By noon, the streets are alive with smells. Smoke from sausages frying in open pans, the tang of sauerkraut, the yeasty sweetness of bakeries turning out loaves by the dozens. Immigrant communities bring their own flavors, Italians with pasta and garlic, Jews with bagels and knishes, Germans with beer and sausages. The melting pot is quite literal. Dinner at home is simpler. A pot of stew bubbles quietly, fed by scraps of meat and handfuls of vegetables. Bread is broken, passed, and dipped. Families eat together, sharing news of the day in a rhythm that feels timeless. Historians still debate how much variety working-class families actually had in their diets, whether it was endless repetition of bread and potatoes or a surprising rotation of meals made possible by urban markets. The truth likely depends on whether your coin purse jingled or sulked in silence. As the evening fades, a small treat might appear. Penny candy, a slice of pie, or perhaps a soda fountain visit if coins allow. The fizz of sarsaparilla or cola feels like luxury bottled, bubbles popping like tiny sparks of modernity. You end the night full but not stuffed. Hunger is always near, but for today you've managed. Morning again, but this time you notice something different. The clothes. Everywhere, fabric speaks its own language, of class, ambition, modesty, and practicality. You tug at your own collar, a little stiff, a little itchy, but that's the price of respectability. Your historical fact. In the early 1900s, clothing was often homemade or tailored, with department stores just beginning to bring ready-to-wear fashion to the middle class. Sears catalogs were revolutionizing how families bought clothes, offering everything from boots to corsets, shipped to your door. For men, suits are the uniform, wool often dark, worn even in summer. A crisp collar, a tie, and perhaps a hat complete the look. Shoes are polished, though scuffed with labor by evening. For working men, overalls and caps replace suits, but the hat remains almost sacred. No hat? You may as well walk around barefoot. Women's fashion, meanwhile, is all about layers. Petticoats, corsets, high collars, long skirts. Sleeves puff and cinch, hems sweep the streets. The silhouette is unmistakable, S-shaped, thanks to corsets that arch the chest forward and hips back. This fashionable discomfort, a phrase that could still describe half the clothing industry today. An obscure tidbit, corset companies once marketed their products as health aids, claiming they supported the spine and improved digestion. Yes, apparently nothing says digestive health like squeezing your waist until breathing feels like a luxury. Children wear scaled-down versions of adult clothing, stiff collars for boys and pinafores for girls. Everyone looks slightly overdressed by modern standards, but that's the point. Appearance is social currency. You walk through a department store, a temple of fabric and display. Silk dresses gleam under gaslight, mannequins pose stiffly, and clerks fuss over customers with measured politeness. The prices are steep, but the dream of elegance is free to browse. Out on the street, laundry flaps from tenement lines, dresses patched and pants darned. Fashion for the working class is practical. Garments mended until they nearly dissolve, boots resoled again and again. Pride isn't in newness, but in keeping clothes respectable despite wear. Historians still debate how much fashion actually trickled down to the poor, whether trends mattered at all when survival dictated fabric choice. Evening brings social events, and with them another round of dress-up. Women adorn themselves with brooches, feathers, or lace. Men don fresh collars, hoping their sleeves hide the day's sweat. At dances, theaters, or even church socials, the impression you make in fabric is nearly as important as the words you speak. By the time you undress for bed, peeling away the layers, you sigh in relief. Clothes in this era shape not just the body but the experience of the day. Tomorrow you'll lace up again. The evening streets hum with a different kind of life. Gas lamps glow in halos of yellow, and the sidewalks begin to fill. Not with workers rushing home, but with families, couples, and young people looking for something to do beyond simply existing. Entertainment, after all, is becoming a serious business in the early 1900s. Your historical fact: the vaudeville stage dominated American entertainment during this period, offering a wild mix of comedy, music, dance, acrobatics, and animal acts. It was variety in the truest sense, where you might watch a trained dog, a ventriloquist, and an opera singer all in the same evening. You slip into a crowded vaudeville theater, the air thick with smoke and laughter. Wooden seats creak, programs rustle, and the stage curtain trembles as another act prepares to dazzle or confuse you. The audience is lively, unashamed of cheering loudly, heckling performers, or laughing until their sides ache. Think of it as the Netflix of 1900. Except you can't skip the bad parts and the intermission snacks are peanuts. An obscure tidbit: some vaudeville shows included water acts, where performers actually splashed around in giant onstage tanks, swimming or diving for the crowd's amusement. Because nothing says cultural sophistication like synchronized cannonballs. After the show, you stroll past Nickelodeon's, the first small movie theaters, where for just 5 cents you can watch short films flicker on screen. They're jerky, silent, black and white, but to the crowds they feel like magic. A train seems to rush straight at the audience, and people gasp, duck, or laugh nervously. Cinema is still a baby here, but already demanding attention. Children swarm around penny arcades, playing mechanical games, peering into mutoscopes, or testing their strength with hammer machines. The clanging, whirring, and shouting is a preview of the amusement parks that will soon bloom. Historians still debate whether vaudeville was more a reflection of popular culture or a carefully curated spectacle designed to smooth over class and ethnic divides. Either way, you find yourself clapping along with the crowd, swept up in the performance. Evenings don't always mean theaters, though. You might spend them at a church social, a community dance, or simply gathered around a parlor piano at home. Music spills into every corner, from barrooms to parlors to street corners. Someone somewhere is always singing. By the time you step back onto the quiet street, the stars faint above the haze. You feel part of something larger. A culture inventing new ways to laugh, to wonder, to pass the long hours between work and sleep. Daylight again, But this time it's a Sunday. Work slows, shops shutter, and the streets feel quieter, though quiet is relative when dozens of church bells chime across a city at once. Religion is woven tightly into daily life, guiding not just Sundays but much of the week. Your historical fact: at the turn of the 20th century, about 85% of Americans identified with a Christian denomination, with Protestantism dominating, Catholicism growing through immigration, and Jewish communities establishing stronger roots in urban centers. You walk into a wooden pew, polished by countless hands and coats. The air is thick with hymns, the organ groaning through familiar tunes. Hats bob in unison, men tipping theirs, women balancing wide-brimmed, feathered creations. Even children, fidgety in their Sunday best, know the drill. An obscure tidbit: some Protestant preachers railed against the sin of bicycle riding on Sundays, claiming it distracted the faithful from church. Imagine a world where pedaling on two wheels was considered moral corruption. Religion isn't just about the sermons, it's about community. Church socials, bake sales, youth groups, and temperance meetings weave people together. The church basement doubles as a town hall, a theater, even a dining hall. Food, fellowship, and faith blur into a rhythm that defines the week. You step back into the street, where you notice signs of another rising force: the temperance movement. Posters warn of the dangers of alcohol. Women hand out pamphlets urging men to quit the saloon. You pass one particularly fiery speech, the orator declaring that alcohol destroys families, jobs, and souls. The crowd nods, though just down the street, the saloon doors swing freely, laughter spilling out with the smell of beer. Historians still debate whether temperance was more about morality or control, whether it was truly about health and family, or a way to enforce stricter social codes on working-class men. The answer, as usual, lies somewhere in the middle. Beyond Christianity, you notice the marks of diversity. Jewish families attend synagogue, lighting candles in windows. Immigrants bring traditions of their own, celebrating feasts and festivals that slowly find space in the American calendar. Religion is both anchor and battleground, shaping neighborhoods, schools, and politics. As evening comes, another church service hums in the background. Some families gather by lamplight, reading scripture or telling stories. Others walk to social gatherings, determined to stretch the Sabbath into one more chance for connection. By bedtime, you realize faith in this era is not simply belief. It's architecture, community, politics, and personal identity, wrapped tightly into daily life. Tomorrow, work begins again. But for now, there is rest. You wake to the steady rattle of wheels on rails. The sound is almost hypnotic, iron against iron, echoing through valleys, bridges, and stations. Trains are the bloodstream of America in the early 1900s, carrying people, letters, newspapers, livestock, and dreams across landscapes so vast you could almost mistake them for eternity. Your historical fact: by 1916, the United States had over 250,000 miles of railway track, more than any other nation in the world. Trains were not just transport. They were civilization's glue, stitching together towns, farms, and cities in a single restless motion. You sit in a wooden seat, upright and stiff, but better than walking, certainly. The car smells faintly of coal smoke, leather, and oranges. The latter from a basket a passenger keeps tucked beside their knees. Across from you, a family juggles picnic baskets and restless children. At the far end, a man in a bowler hat snores gently, his head bouncing with the train's sway. An obscure tidbit: in some train stations, Hat checkers were employed specifically to make sure gentlemen didn't lose or misplace their hats in the commotion. Imagine a whole job devoted entirely to keeping track of headwear. As you pass small towns, you glimpse depots bustling with farmers loading milk cans, merchants stacking crates, and children waving wildly at the passing cars. For rural families, the daily train whistle was not just background noise. It was a lifeline. Mail-order catalogs, like those from Sears, could now deliver almost anything straight to a small-town station. A new dress, a set of tools, even a house kit, you name it, and the train would drag it into town. Historians still debate whether trains created true national unity or whether they deepened divisions, speeding industrial wealth for some while leaving others stranded in economic stagnation. The train, after all, brought both opportunity and inequality, just as any major technology tends to do. And just beyond the station platforms, a new invention is beginning to make its presence known. The automobile. You spot one rattling along a dirt road, its wheels bouncing like an awkward puppy. Children chase it, laughing, while farmers shake their heads in disbelief. Never replace the horse, some mutter. But you know better, it will. For now, though, it's trains and trolleys that dominate the streets. In cities, you ride open-air streetcars, clanging along tracks embedded in cobblestones. People pile in with packages, umbrellas, and gossip, moving in jerky bursts of progress and sudden halts. Streetcars are the rhythm of urban life, the way workers, shoppers, and schoolchildren travel miles for a nickel. By evening, you step down at your stop, the day's dust clinging to your clothes. The train disappears into the distance, its whistle sounding oddly mournful. It feels like the sound of a century racing forward, never pausing, never asking permission. The whistle fades, but another sound quickly takes its place. The relentless clatter of machines inside a factory. You walk closer, and the air thickens with heat, oil, and the metallic tang of iron. Inside, the noise is deafening, a chorus of pounding hammers, whirring belts, and shouts carried over the din. Your historical fact. In the early 1900s, factories powered by steam and electricity produced everything from textiles to automobiles, employing millions of workers who often labored 6 days a week, 10 hours a day. You slip into the floor among rows of men, women, and even children, all focused on their tasks. Fingers move with practiced speed. Tying, stitching, lifting, polishing. Breaks are short, pay is low, and accidents are frequent. Yet here, work is survival. An obscure tidbit. In some textile mills, workers weren't allowed to bring watches, so management installed factory whistles to regulate time, signaling when to arrive, when to break, when to stop. Entire neighborhoods lived by the sound of those whistles, like obedient clockwork. The air grows heavier as you move deeper. Dust hangs in the sunlight, and fans turn slowly overhead, barely cutting through the heat. A child, no more than 12, stands on a box to reach his station. This is not unusual. Child labor laws exist on paper but are rarely enforced. Historians still debate whether industrial work truly freed families from agricultural drudgery or simply replaced one form of hardship with another. At least in a factory, pay was steady, though steady might mean just enough to afford bread and rent. Yet it's not all bleak. Factories also create communities. Workers share lunch pails, swap jokes, and organize picnics on rare free days. And from these shared struggles, unions begin to stir. Leaflets pass quietly between hands, whispering about strikes, about rights, about dignity. The labor movement, though young, is finding its voice. You step outside at dusk, ears still ringing, face damp with soot. The factory windows glow like tired eyes behind you. You hear a whistle, this time not from a train, but from the building itself, signaling the end of another grinding day. As you walk home, you realize how much of life is dictated by these new machines. They set the pace, the rhythm, the rules, and everyone, willingly or not, is learning to dance along. You step away from the factory's echo, down a side street that feels quieter, softer, though it is no less alive. The air is tinged with the smell of fresh bread, laundry soap, and the faint smoke of coal stoves. Home sense, neighborhood sense. This is domestic life in the early 1900s, and you are now stepping into the small, carefully managed world of ordinary households. Homes are smaller than modern imaginations might expect. Cramped apartments in cities, wooden farmhouses in the countryside, sometimes boarding houses where families rent a single room and share the kitchen with strangers. Your historical fact: by 1910, nearly half of all American homes did not have indoor plumbing. Families hauled water in buckets, heating it on stoves for baths, laundry, and dishwashing. A bath night was often a weekly ordeal, not a daily routine. Inside a tenement apartment, you see a family gathered around a kitchen table. The father repairs shoes by lamplight, the mother peels potatoes into a tin bowl, and the children squabble over a game of marbles. The furniture is mismatched, the wallpaper peeling, yet the room feels stubbornly alive. An obscure tidbit: many tenement homes kept canaries or finches in cages by the window, not for companionship but as tiny, fluttering alarms against dangerous gas leaks. If the bird stopped singing, something was wrong. A feathered warning system, cheaper than a mechanic. In a farmhouse kitchen, by contrast, the rhythm is set by the land. You hear the creak of rocking chairs, the bubbling of a pot over the stove, and the scratch of a broom across wooden floors. Life here is work, too, but different work. Tending chickens, milking cows, canning fruit, mending clothes. Historians still debate whether home life in this era was a sanctuary from work or simply another extension of it, especially for women. Rest was rare when cooking, cleaning, sewing, and caring for children filled every waking moment. Yet even in the grind, there is intimacy. Families tell stories by firelight, share meals shoulder to shoulder, and pass heirlooms from one generation to the next. You watch a grandmother hand a quilt to her daughter, its fabric worn thin by decades of use, stitched with patches from old dresses and shirts. It is history written in cloth, and she passes it along with no ceremony. Just another night, another gesture of care. By the end of the evening, the house grows dim, the lamplight lowered, the doors latched. You listen as the city outside softens into a chorus of muted footsteps and distant whistles. In the farmhouse, it is even quieter. Just the crickets, the sigh of wind against wooden boards, and the low hum of life preparing to begin again tomorrow. Morning in the neighborhood begins with a roar. You step outside, and the street is already awake, alive with the energy of 1,000 separate errands. The milkman clinks bottles onto doorsteps. Newspaper boys shout headlines. Horses clop and snort as they drag carts filled with coal, vegetables, or ice. It is the daily theater of urban life, noisy but strangely comforting. Your historical fact: by 1900, nearly 40% of Americans lived in urban areas, a dramatic rise from just decades earlier. Cities were swelling, their populations fed by immigration, industry, and rural migration. Shops spill their goods onto sidewalks. Barrels of apples, bolts of cloth, buckets of pickles, and tins of candy. Housewives with baskets haggle over prices. Children dart between stalls, and vendors call out like auctioneers. The sidewalks are narrow, the buildings tall, and the sense of space almost claustrophobic. Yet there is also a kind of vibrancy, like a permanent festival of survival. An obscure tidbit: some neighborhoods employed ice inspectors to test whether blocks of ice being delivered were actually clean enough to be used for food storage. Without refrigerators, households depended on ice boxes, and bad ice could mean spoiled meat or worse. Imagine your milk depending on the honor system of an ice cellar. The smells are not subtle. Fresh bread from the bakery, fish from the munger, coal smoke from the street lamps, and the less romantic aroma of horse manure mingling with rainwater in the gutters. You step carefully because no one is picking it up. Not yet, anyway. Historians still debate whether the explosive growth of cities in this period was a sign of progress or of chaos barely held together. Tenements rose faster than sanitation, schools overflowed, and diseases spread quickly. Yet the city also offered what rural life rarely could: choice, movement, opportunity, a chance to reinvent yourself in the crowd. Children play stickball between wagons, women lean out of windows to gossip, and organ grinders set up on street corners, filling the air with music. And then, from somewhere behind you, a streetcar bell clangs, warning pedestrians to step aside as it rumbles down the track. The crowd parts briefly, then closes again like water, the rhythm of life resuming. By nightfall, the city glows with 1,000 lamps, some gas, some electric, their lights spilling unevenly across cobblestones and storefronts. You pause at a corner and look around. So much noise, so much life, so much restless energy condensed into these streets. And yet, for all the movement, there is also a kind of stillness beneath it. A sense that the city is humming with the same quiet desire as every farmhouse, every factory floor, every boarding house room. The desire to keep going, to make it through another day, and to find something of worth in the middle of it all. You turn down a street that feels different, lighter, noisier, tinged with laughter instead of work. For once, you are stepping into a corner of the early 1900s where the goal is not survival but escape. Entertainment, in its many strange and inventive forms, was a lifeline for people weighed down by the endless churn of labor. Your historical fact: by 1900, vaudeville theaters numbered in the thousands across America, offering cheap, fast-paced variety shows that became the country's most popular form of entertainment. A few cents could buy you hours of juggling acts, acrobatics, magicians, comedians, and sometimes performers who were famous for being wonderfully odd. You walk into one of these theaters, and it is nothing like the grand opera houses of Europe. The seats are wooden, the floor sticky, the air hot from so many bodies crammed together. Yet when the curtain rises, the audience forgets all of that. A man swallows swords, a woman belts out comic songs, and a small troupe of dancers twirl in impossible unison. An obscure tidbit: some vaudeville shows included trained flea circuses, where insects pulled tiny carts or performed tricks under magnifying glasses. Imagine paying money to watch fleas on stage, and you'll understand both the desperation for novelty and the sheer creativity of showmen in this era. Outside the theaters, amusement parks were sprouting. Coney Island in New York became the playground of the nation, its roller coasters and electric lights dazzling visitors who had never seen such spectacle before. For many, stepping into Luna Park was like stepping into another world. Towers glowing with bulbs, mechanical rides whirling, sideshows promising everything from fortune tellers to fire eaters. Historians still debate whether these amusements were liberating escapes or carefully controlled distractions meant to pacify the working classes. Was Coney Island a dreamland of freedom, or a glowing distraction that made you forget the cramped tenement you'd return to afterward? Yet in the moment, standing under the lights, eating roasted peanuts, and hearing the shrieks of roller coaster riders, you do not care. Life is brief, the factory is long, and for once you get to feel joy without consequence. You wander further into leisure, where not all escapes involve flashing lights and noisy stages. Some are quiet, ordinary, but no less important. Libraries, for instance, spread rapidly in this era, thanks in part to Andrew Carnegie's donations. By 1920, more than 1,500 Carnegie libraries had been built in America, opening their doors to anyone who wanted to sit, read, and learn in a calm, clean space. You step into one. The hush is immediate, the air faintly dusty with the scent of paper and ink. Rows of wooden tables stretch across the room, lit by tall windows. A boy pores over a book of mechanical drawings. A girl traces her finger across a page of poetry. For many families, these libraries offered the only access to books outside of school. Your historical fact: literacy rates in the U.S. rose sharply during this period, reaching nearly 92% by 1910 among young adults. A huge leap from the mid-1800s. Libraries were both cause and effect of this hunger for knowledge. Elsewhere, leisure takes the form of community gatherings. Church picnics, baseball games, barn dances, and public lectures are the glue that holds neighborhoods together. On Sundays, you hear the clatter of picnic baskets being opened, the thud of baseballs against gloves, and the sound of fiddles coaxing tired feet into dances. An obscure tidbit: some communities even organized walking clubs, where groups of men and women would stroll together through town or countryside in carefully choreographed outings. Walking, in this context, was not exercise but social display, an opportunity to show off one's clothes, one's manners, and one's availability. Historians still debate whether early 20th century leisure truly provided rest or was simply another performance of social expectation. Was a church picnic relaxing, or was it an unspoken competition of whose potato salad was best? Yet leisure, however tangled with expectation, mattered. It gave families something to look forward to, neighbors something to bond over, and children memories that softened the grind of daily life. You picture a boy clutching a baseball he caught at a Sunday game, carrying it in his pocket like a treasure for weeks afterward. By evening, you walk past the quiet park where couples stroll arm in arm under gas lamps, where older men play checkers at wooden tables, and where a bandstand offers music to anyone willing to pause and listen. Leisure here is not glamorous, not dazzling, but it is steady and real. And as the lamps flicker on, you realize that in both the noisy world of vaudeville and the quiet world of the park, what people sought was the same: a small piece of joy, something to remind them that life could be more than toil. You wake to the sound of something you might mistake for thunder, except it repeats every few seconds, steady and metallic. It is the age of machines, the early 1900s, and the world hums, rattles, and clanks in ways that previous generations would have found unearthly. Steam whistles shriek from factories at dawn. Streetcars rattle along iron rails, their electric lines sparking faint blue flashes overhead. Horses still clop through city streets, but now they compete with automobiles, smoke-belching, horn-tooting contraptions that both terrify and fascinate. Your historical fact: by 1913, Henry Ford's moving assembly line had revolutionized car production, cutting the time to build a Model T from 12 hours to just 93 minutes. This innovation not only transformed industry but also reshaped life itself. Cars suddenly became accessible to middle-class families, not just the wealthy elite. You see your first Model T chugging down a muddy road. Its owner beams with pride, though his neighbors mutter that the machine is too loud, too smelly, and certainly unsafe. Children run alongside, laughing and waving. Horses shy away, eyes rolling. An obscure tidbit: some early car owners carried picnic baskets filled with chicken wire and soap, because breakdowns were so common that patching radiators with improvised tricks was just part of the adventure. Imagine buying a new car today and being told you should also bring along a chicken wire kit just in case. The streets are crowded with competing inventions. Phonographs crank out music in parlors, typewriters clatter in offices, and sewing machines whir in homes. Technology brings noise, speed, and a strange new intimacy. Families huddle around radios to hear disembodied voices speak news and stories straight into their living rooms. Historians still debate whether the machine age improved quality of life for the average person or simply increased the pace of labor, shifting exhaustion from muscle to nerves. Were people freer or just caught in a faster treadmill? Yet, as you pass a house where children sit spellbound around a phonograph, hearing a distant opera singer's voice as if she were in the room, you can't help but feel the wonder. Machines promise that life could be not only faster, but also richer, louder, and, if you were lucky, more entertaining. You walk deeper into the hum of invention and encounter the machine that would change not just how people lived, but how they saw literally. The motion picture camera had arrived, and with it, the dream of stories that flickered across screens for crowds to watch together. Your historical fact: by 1905, the first Nickelodeon theaters had opened, charging just 5 cents for admission. Within a decade, thousands existed across the U.S., making cinema one of the most rapidly spreading cultural phenomena in history. You step into one. The theater is dim, stuffy, and smells faintly of popcorn grease and damp coats. The piano at the front plinks an improvised tune as black and white figures flicker across the screen. The audience gasps, laughs, and points. Some people even duck when a train appears to rush straight toward them. An obscure tidbit: some of the earliest films shown weren't grand stories at all but simple scenes of everyday life. Workers leaving a factory, a baby eating breakfast, waves crashing on a beach. Audiences were stunned, not because the subject was remarkable, but because moving pictures themselves seemed like magic. Meanwhile, in wealthier homes, another invention is buzzing: the telephone. Neighbors marvel at the possibility of speaking across town without stepping outside. The first time you hold the receiver, you hesitate, half expecting the voice on the other end to somehow see you. Historians still debate whether these new inventions truly connected people or created new forms of isolation. Did cinema bring communities together in shared laughter? Or did it replace the older traditions of storytelling around a fire? The truth, perhaps, is both. What you sense walking out of the Nickelodeon into a street alive with electric lamps and ringing bells is that the early 1900s were an era of restless invention, each gadget promising to make life more convenient, more thrilling, or at least more modern. Yet even in the dazzle of moving pictures and ringing telephones, one thing remains the same: people gathering together, eager for a story, a laugh, or just a connection across the noise of the world. You step away from the clamor of machines, moving toward quieter streets where the concerns are not about horsepower or assembly lines, but about something far older: health, frailty, and survival. The early 1900s were not gentle on the body. Coughs rattled through houses in winter, fevers spread easily, and sanitation was, let's call it, developing. A street might look lively with children playing, yet you knew too well that many would not live to adulthood. Your historical fact. In 1900, the average life expectancy in the United States was about 47 years. That's not because everyone dropped dead before 50, but because infant and child mortality rates were heartbreakingly high. Survive childhood and your chances of reaching old age improved, but it was never guaranteed. Hospitals existed, yes, but they were often places of last resort, not comfort. Many preferred to be treated at home by family, midwives, or local healers. Doctors prescribed tonics that promised vigor and health, some laced with opium, cocaine, or generous quantities of alcohol. You would not find a neat childproof label. An obscure tidbit. In some American cities, people believed chewing on certain roots or wearing little bags of camphor around the neck could ward off influenza. Others swore by onions tucked under pillows, garlic hung in doorways, or whiskey as a cure-all for just about everything from coughs to heartbreak. Historians still debate whether medical progress in the early 1900s was truly revolutionary or simply a transition stage, a bridge between old folk practices and the scientific breakthroughs of later decades. You pass by a small pharmacy. The window advertises miracle tonics, with glowing names like Electric Bitters or Dr. King's New Discovery. The bottles sparkle in the light, promising renewed energy, clear skin, and relief from nearly all known ailments. In truth, they're more likely to provide a temporary buzz, followed by a lingering hangover. But there is hope, too. Cities are slowly investing in public sanitation, cleaner water systems, trash collection, and campaigns against the ever-present threat of tuberculosis. Nurses, trained in the legacy of Florence Nightingale, bring compassion into the harshness of crowded wards. And slowly, very slowly, germs become not just invisible threats but visible in the mind's eye, understood through microscopes and scientific journals. Still, you hear the rattle of a cough behind you, and it lingers like a drumbeat, reminding you that for all the marvels of invention, life in the early 1900s was fragile, uncertain, and often unfair. You walk into a quieter home, one where illness and its rituals shape the rhythm of daily life. The parlor is dim, the curtains drawn, not just for rest, but because many believed darkness and quiet soothed fevers. Here you witness the other side of medicine, care delivered not by professionals but by family members. Mothers, daughters, and sometimes grandmothers mix poultices in the kitchen, brew teas of mint and chamomile, or rub mustard plasters onto chests. Remedies pass from generation to generation, tested more by memory than science. Your historical fact. The Flexner Report of 1910 completely reshaped American medical education, shutting down many poorly run schools and pushing the profession toward standardized, science-based training. This reform was painful. Many communities lost local practitioners, but it laid the groundwork for modern medicine. An obscure tidbit. During this time, some people swore by rest cures for nervous conditions, essentially locking patients, often women, into quiet rooms, forbidding reading or writing, and prescribing bed rest for weeks. It was meant to soothe frayed nerves but often drove people to the edge of despair. Historians still debate whether these rest cures were an attempt at genuine compassion or a reflection of gendered assumptions about fragility and hysteria. Perhaps both truths intertwine uncomfortably. You notice small details. A porcelain chamber pot discreetly tucked beneath a bed, a glass thermometer lying in a saucer, and a heavy quilt that smells faintly of camphor and lavender. The air is thick with both worry and tenderness. Families often bore illness together, finding comfort in small acts, cooling a forehead, spooning broth, or reading aloud from a Bible or favorite book. Outside, public health campaigns slowly make their mark. Posters urge people to cover their coughs, wash their hands, and boil water. These seem obvious to you, but at the time they were radical shifts, asking people to see invisible threats in the everyday. And as you drift away from the sick room, you sense how deeply health shaped early 1900s life. Each day was a careful balance between hope and fear, between old remedies and new science, between fragile bodies and the resilience of families determined to care for their own. You step now into a kitchen, warm with the hum of activity and the faint smell of coal smoke. Pots hang from hooks, the table is scarred with years of chopping, and flour dust lingers in the air like morning fog. Kitchens in the early 1900s were not yet sleek or gleaming. They were practical, crowded, and often the center of family life. Your historical fact: by 1900, about 40% of Americans still lived on farms, and much of the food they ate was grown, preserved, or prepared at home. Store-bought items were creeping in, yes, but meals were still shaped by season, labor, and necessity. You see a woman in a long skirt kneading bread, her sleeves rolled up, the dough folding and stretching under her hands with the rhythm of a heartbeat. Children dart around, waiting for scraps or stealing a taste. The bread will feed the household for days, and its smell will linger long after the loaf is cut. An obscure tidbit: many households kept a sourdough starter alive for decades, even generations. Families passed it down like a living heirloom, nurturing it with flour and water, sharing it with neighbors, or guarding it like treasure. If you ruined the starter, you didn't just waste bread, you risked family tradition. Historians still debate whether the rise of packaged foods in the early 1900s was seen as liberation from kitchen drudgery or a loss of flavor and authenticity. Probably, as always, it was a mix of both. You glance at the pantry. Jars of preserves glimmer like jewels. Blackberry, apple butter, pickled cucumbers. Root vegetables sit patiently in baskets, waiting their turn. The refrigerator is not humming in the corner, because it doesn't exist yet. Instead, there is an icebox, and the iceman delivers great dripping blocks to keep milk from spoiling. If you miss the iceman, well, better eat fast. There is humor here, too. Imagine convincing a child in 1900 that one day people would order fast food by tapping glowing glass rectangles. They would probably assume you'd inhaled too much coal smoke. The family gathers at the table. Meals are not just about eating. They are the glue of the day, a chance to exchange stories, laugh at small mishaps, or sit in tired silence. Food is simple, but it carries the weight of survival and the warmth of connection. You linger in the dining room, where the rituals of eating become a stage for manners, etiquette, and unspoken rules. A lace tablecloth covers the wood, mismatched china is set carefully, and a kerosene lamp glows overhead. A child squirms, anxious to eat, while an older sibling recites a blessing before the first spoonful. The food may be plain, stew, potatoes, bread, but it is shared with ceremony. Your historical fact: in the early 1900s, nutrition science was still in its infancy. Vitamins had not yet been discovered. People believed in hearty meals, but the idea of balanced diets was more guesswork than science. A big slab of meat and potatoes was thought to be the ultimate strength-giving food. An obscure tidbit: gelatin dishes, often savory, began to creep into fashionable dining. Picture cold, trembling towers of aspic filled with vegetables or meat, wobbling as they were carried to the table. To modern eyes, they look like culinary accidents, but at the time they were signs of refinement. Historians still debate whether dining etiquette in this era reflected genuine civility or was simply a performance to prove one's place in society. Did people really enjoy sitting stiff-backed, passing dishes clockwise, and never speaking with their mouths full? Or did they secretly long to just grab a drumstick and get on with it? The dining room reflects aspiration as much as appetite. In wealthier households, silverware glimmers, crystal glasses sparkle, and multiple courses arrive in sequence. In humbler homes, the ritual may be pared down, but there is still pride in a well-set table, in the dignity of sharing food together. Outside, restaurants are changing too. Cafes, luncheonettes, and department store tea rooms offer new experiences. For women especially, dining out in public without male escorts is becoming more acceptable. Eating, once strictly domestic, begins to spill into the social world. You step into a one-room schoolhouse, the kind that sits on a dirt road surrounded by fields, its bell silent until the teacher pulls the rope. The walls are plain wood, the windows streaked with light, and the smell is a blend of chalk dust, coal smoke, and ink. You sit at a narrow desk, your knees bumping against its edge, the surface carved with initials from generations of fidgety students before you. Your historical fact: by 1900, compulsory education laws had spread across most U.S. states, meaning children were expected, at least in theory, to attend school until about age 14. Literacy rates rose sharply, especially in urban areas, and the classroom became a cornerstone of American childhood. You hear the scratch of slate pencils, the shuffle of boots on wood floors, and the teacher's firm voice reciting multiplication tables. The rhythm of 2 times 2 is for echoes like a chant, the kind that will lodge itself in your brain and haunt you decades later. An obscure tidbit: many rural teachers were barely older than their students. Some were just 16 or 17 themselves, hired because they could read and write a little better than the rest. Imagine trying to maintain discipline when half your class knows you used to play marbles with them last summer. Historians still debate whether one-room schools were a triumph of egalitarian education or an inefficient relic. On one hand, they gave countless children access to learning. On the other, teaching arithmetic to 6-year-olds and literature to 14-year-olds in the same room required the patience of a saint, or at least someone with strong lungs for shouting. You glance at the blackboard. The chalk squeaks and the teacher draws maps of the United States, though some borders are suspiciously vague. A globe sits in the corner, chipped and faded, its oceans pale blue, its continents distorted. The knowledge is imperfect, but it is expanding, and for many children this little room is the first window to the wider world. And then there is the humor. The boy in the back row who hides a frog in his lunch pail, the girl who daydreams so intensely she doesn't notice her pigtails being dipped in the inkwell. Teachers sigh, roll their eyes, and hand out extra penmanship practice as punishment. Penmanship, ironically, which no one in the future will use once keyboards appear, but don't tell them that. School is equal parts discipline, monotony, and wonder. You hear a hymn sung together, the voices thin but sincere, and you realize this is more than just learning. It is shaping citizens, one chalk mark at a time. You linger as the school day winds down, but now your gaze shifts from the blackboard to the playground outside. The children, finally free of arithmetic, burst out the door like wild birds released from a cage. Your historical fact: recess in early 1900 schools wasn't just about fun, it was considered vital exercise. Progressive educators believed outdoor play helped build character, teamwork, and health. It also gave the teacher a blessed break from the chaos of inside. You see children skipping rope, clapping out rhymes, and playing tag on the hard-packed earth. Boys toss a baseball, their gloves stiff leather that smells faintly of oil. Girls balance in pairs, laughing at each wobble. Everyone's shoes kick up dust, and their shouts carry across the fields. An obscure tidbit: some schools punished misbehavior by making children wear the dunce cap, a pointed paper hat meant to humiliate. Ironically, many of the kids sent to the corner weren't unintelligent at all, just restless, bored, or unlucky enough to talk at the wrong moment. Historians suspect more than a few future innovators wore that hat. Historians still debate whether early 20th century schooling truly fostered creativity or simply molded conformity. The balance between discipline and imagination, after all, is a seesaw that never quite finds equilibrium. Back inside, you notice the small details: the ink-stained fingers, the clumsy chalk diagrams of machinery, the careful recitations of patriotic poems. Lessons are more than facts. They are moral instructions, teaching children what to admire, what to obey, and what to aspire toward. And yes, there's humor too. The school lunches, packed in tin pails, often consist of bread, an apple, and perhaps cold fried chicken. Compare that to today's neon-colored snacks, and suddenly a slice of stale bread seems almost elegant. As dusk falls, the teacher closes the schoolhouse door, her steps weary but proud. She has juggled 6 grades, 20 personalities, and 1 frog under a desk. She will be back tomorrow, chalk in hand, ready to do it all again. You walk down a narrow cobblestone street and step into the heart of a factory in the early 1900s. The air is thick with dust and the sharp tang of machine oil. The floor trembles with the steady thrum of belts and gears, and your ears buzz with the relentless rhythm of clattering looms, pounding presses, and grinding wheels. Your historical fact: by 1910, the United States had become the world's leading industrial power, surpassing even Britain. Factories filled cities with jobs, noise, and smoke, drawing millions of workers, including recent immigrants, into the grinding rhythm of industrial life. You stand in a textile mill, rows of looms stretching endlessly like soldiers at attention. Children dart between machines, their hands small enough to tie broken threads while the machines keep running. The foreman paces with a stopwatch, timing breaks with a precision that feels closer to science than humanity. An obscure tidbit: some factories introduced stretch-out systems, forcing workers to operate more machines with fewer hands. It meant more efficiency for the owner and more exhaustion for the laborer. Imagine being told, "Congratulations, you've been promoted to doing the work of 3 people for the same pay." Historians still debate whether these factories were more exploitative prisons of labor or gateways to economic opportunity. The truth, as always, likely sits somewhere in the middle, leaning toward whichever side of the loom you happen to stand on. You glance upward. The windows are grimy, their panes filtering sunlight into muted gold. Dust motes float like tiny dancers in the air, though they sting your nose when you breathe too deeply. Your clothes smell faintly of coal smoke within minutes of stepping inside. And here comes the dry humor. Workers often sang or joked to pass the time, inventing verses about the very machines enslaving them. Picture the equivalent of today's office workers making memes about their spreadsheets, but with more calluses and fewer coffee breaks. You wipe your brow. The work is endless, repetitive, and sometimes dangerous, but it is steady. For many families, These walls of noise and dust are the difference between survival and hunger. You drift now from the textile mill into a steel foundry. The change is immediate, heat hits you like a wave. Flames roar in furnaces the size of small houses, and molten metal glows like a living sun. Men in heavy leather aprons stand with long poles, their faces blackened by soot, their movements slow and precise, as if choreographed by necessity. Your historical fact: by 1900, Andrew Carnegie's steel empire had turned Pittsburgh into the world's steel capital. Steel girders were shaping skylines, fueling railroads, and building the bones of America's modern cities. The roar is constant, the heat unrelenting. Sparks fly like fireflies, except these ones could burn holes through your shirt in an instant. Sweat pours down workers' faces, and even their boots grow hot against the furnace floor. An obscure tidbit: many steel workers chewed on damp cloths just to breathe through the smoke and ash. It was a makeshift solution, like an early DIY respirator, though far from effective. Historians still debate whether the sacrifices of these men were noble building blocks of progress or simply the result of an economic system that valued steel more than skin. You lean against a wall, careful not to touch the iron tools lying there. They're hotter than a skillet left in the sun. The rhythm of shovels feeding coal, hammers striking, and chains clanking becomes strangely hypnotic. If you weren't half suffocated, you might even fall asleep to it. And the humor sneaks in. Some workers joked that if they died on the job, their families wouldn't even need a coffin. The steel mill could just pour them into a mold. Grim, yes, but it speaks to how humor becomes a survival tool in the harshest conditions. As night falls, the furnaces still glow. Steel does not sleep, and neither do the men tending its fires. You step back into the night air, blinking at the cool breeze, realizing that outside silence feels alien after so many hours of industrial thunder. You step out from the roar of factories and into the busy pulse of the city street. The air changes. You trade the metallic tang of molten steel for the layered perfume of horse manure, roasting peanuts, coal smoke, and someone frying onions on a street corner. It's a complicated bouquet, and no perfume company has dared bottle it. Your historical fact: by 1910, more than half of Americans lived in urban areas for the first time in history. The shift from rural life to city streets was swift, chaotic, and, in many ways, overwhelming. Streetcars rumble past, sparks crackling from the electric lines overhead. Horses clop steadily, pulling wagons laden with barrels or crates. Street vendors shout their wares, from pickles to penny newspapers. A boy runs up, waving headlines about politics you're too sleepy to follow. The city is a living chorus, loud, unpolished, but strangely rhythmic. An obscure tidbit: streetcar etiquette guides were sometimes published, warning passengers not to spit on the floorboards or monopolize the handrail. Apparently, even then, people needed reminders about public manners. Some things never change. Historians still debate whether these rapid urban expansions represented progress or peril. Cities brought jobs, culture, and opportunity, but also overcrowding, pollution, and poverty. The truth, again, depends on whether you own the tenement or lived in it. The sidewalks bustle with women in long skirts and wide-brimmed hats, balancing shopping baskets as they avoid puddles. Men in bowler hats cluster at corners, smoking cigars and arguing about baseball or the price of bread. You notice a newsstand, rows of papers with bold fonts screaming drama. Clickbait headlines existed before clicks, it seems. For humor's sake, imagine if traffic jams were already a thing, except instead of honking horns, you had frustrated drivers yelling, Get your horse moving. Progress, apparently, has always been stuck in traffic. As you walk, you hear a gramophone spilling tinny music from a shop window. Ragtime rhythms tap out into the street, and children skip to the beat. The city feels alive, though crowded, every doorway and window hiding a story. You wander deeper into the city, where tall tenement buildings rise like brick giants. Laundry flaps from windows on clotheslines, waving like flags of survival. You look up and count. 5, 6, sometimes 7 floors stacked with families, each cramped apartment smaller than a single modern living room. Your historical fact. In New York City alone, nearly 2/3 of the population lived in tenements around 1900. Entire families, sometimes 8 or 10 people, shared a few small rooms with no indoor plumbing. The stairwells are dark, the hallways narrow. You pass doors from behind which spill laughter, arguments, and the clatter of dishes. In one corner, children chalk games onto the street, their giggles rising above the clamor of horse carts. An obscure tidbit. Some landlords actually charge tenants for access to the shared outhouse in the courtyard. Imagine paying rent and then paying extra just to use the bathroom. That's a subscription service nobody asked for. Historians still debate whether tenements were primarily sites of community resilience or symbols of exploitation. Life inside them was both. Neighbors leaned on each other, even as landlords leaned on rent money. The smell is layered here too. Stew cooking, coal smoke, and a hint of sewage. But inside, the walls carry warmth. You spot a family gathered around a kerosene lamp, a mother sewing while a father reads aloud from the paper. It is cramped, yes, but not joyless. People carve out little pockets of comfort, even where space itself seems rationed. Here comes your humor. If you think your apartment is too small for guests, imagine throwing a dinner party in a tenement kitchen. You'd invite your neighbors by simply opening the window and passing food through. Efficient, if not exactly spacious. Out on the stoop, women gossip while peeling potatoes, and children chase each other up and down the steps. The city may be overcrowded, but it pulses with human energy, weaving together a million small dramas into one great, messy tapestry. You drift from the shadow of the tenements into a brighter, noisier part of the city. Signs glow with gaslight and electric bulbs, some flickering uncertainly as if they're not quite convinced electricity is worth trusting. The theaters line the street, promising vaudeville shows, Nickelodeons, and magic lantern performances. You can feel the pull of entertainment tugging you forward, the hum of curiosity floating on the air. Here's your historical fact. By the early 1900s, vaudeville was the dominant form of American entertainment, with theaters in nearly every major city. Performers ranged from comedians and dancers to trained dogs, acrobats, and musicians. If you wanted variety, you got it, though not always good variety. You step inside one of these vaudeville theaters, where the wooden seats creak under the weight of the audience. The stage curtain sways, the orchestra warms up, and a master of ceremonies shouts into the smoky room. Performers tumble out one after another. Tap dancers with fast feet, a juggler balancing plates, and a comic whose jokes are, well, let's say humor hasn't always aged well. An obscure tidbit. Some vaudeville acts were so strange that they included human oddities or living curiosities. From people eating glass to individuals reciting the alphabet backward while standing on their heads. Imagine buying a ticket just to see someone sneeze on command. Historians still debate whether vaudeville should be celebrated as the birthplace of modern American showbiz or condemned for its exploitative tendencies. Like so many things, the truth is probably both. A light joke for you. If you've ever thought your Netflix queue is random, remember, audiences here went from opera singers to plate spinners to train seals, all in the same evening. The original algorithm was whatever we can book. Outside the theaters, the streets are alive with music spilling from saloons and Nickelodeons. A nickel buys you a reel of flickering images, short films that last barely 15 minutes but feel like magic. Black and white cowboys ride across the tiny screen, their horses clattering in jerky motion. The crowd gasps as if real bullets might fly through the screen. You leave the theater as the streetlights hum to life, the city's heartbeat growing faster as the evening deepens. Entertainment, it seems, is everywhere. Cheap, cheerful, and never quiet. You continue your stroll, pulled along by the glow of shop windows and the chatter of night crowds. The amusements multiply. Penny arcades, dance halls, and music drifting from open doors. You pause at a small crowd gathered around a mechanical fortune teller in a glass case. The machine blinks its painted eyes, a card slides out, and someone laughs nervously. People trust machines with their futures, though this one looks suspiciously like it can't even tell the weather. Your historical fact: the early 1900s saw the rise of the amusement park, with places like Coney Island drawing millions. Roller coasters, mechanical rides, and funhouses gave urban crowds a taste of thrills they couldn't find in cramped tenements or factory floors. Step closer in your mind and you're suddenly there, Coney Island in its heyday. Lights dazzle against the night sky, a boardwalk stretches ahead, and the smell of salt air mixes with popcorn and fried dough. Crowds surge with excitement, their voices carrying over the crashing waves. Here's a curious tidbit. Coney Island once featured an exhibit where premature babies were placed in incubators and displayed to the public as both science and spectacle. Oddly enough, this strange attraction saved lives, since hospitals weren't widely equipped with incubators yet. Entertainment and medicine made an unlikely pair. Historians still debate whether amusement parks offered genuine freedom for working-class people or simply served as another way for owners to profit from the masses. Either way, the laughter and wide-eyed wonder of the crowd suggests escape mattered more than philosophy. Your humor for this section. Imagine riding a rickety 1905 roller coaster with no seatbelt and just a wooden bar keeping you in. Suddenly, your modern complaints about slow Wi-Fi seem adorable. Back on the city streets, children press their noses against the glass of toy shops, while couples stroll arm in arm past ice cream parlors. The whole world feels wrapped in movement and sound. Entertainment doesn't sleep, it merely changes costume depending on the hour. And you, drifting gently through it all, feel the blur between exhaustion and delight. The city never really stops. It just hums at different frequencies. You slip away from the glowing theaters and amusement lights, guided now by a quieter but equally persuasive force, the smell of food. The early 1900s city is alive with it. Roasted chestnuts crackling on a street corner, fried fish sizzling in lard, sweet pies cooling in tenement windows. You follow your nose and find yourself in the kitchens of the era, where cooking is equal parts necessity, creativity, and trial by fire. Here's your historical fact. By 1900, cooking stoves were replacing open hearths in most American homes, especially in urban areas. Coal and wood stoves allowed more controlled heat, though they still filled kitchens with soot, smoke, and the occasional small explosion if you got too ambitious with damp coal. The kitchen of a working-class family is small and hot, its air thick with steam and smoke. A woman in a long skirt stirs a heavy pot of stew while keeping one eye on a toddler near the fire. Bread bakes in the oven, its crust browning unevenly. The family eats cheaply but heartily, beans, bread, potatoes, maybe a scrap of meat stretched into broth. An obscure tidbit: many kitchens kept a drip jar, a container for collecting bacon grease or cooking fat, which would later be reused in nearly every dish. Want cookies? Add some fat. Fried potatoes? Fat. Soap? Yes, that too. Waste not, want not, though you might sometimes want less. Historians still debate whether the rise of packaged foods in the early 20th century improved nutrition or just introduced new ways of eating starch and sugar in colorful wrappers. Here's your light humor. Modern meal prep influencers with their neat containers would faint at the sight of an early 1900s pantry, lined not with kale smoothies, but with barrels of flour, salt pork, and dusty jars of pickles floating like oddities in brine. As you wander through these kitchens, you notice the rituals of mealtime binding families together. Dinner is often eaten early, with everyone crowded around a simple wooden table. A blessing is said, food is passed, and stories of the day are shared. There is little choice, little luxury, but a great deal of presence. You eat what's served. You eat together. The smell of bread follows you as you slip out of the kitchen, carrying with it the comfort of the familiar, the ordinary, and the sustaining. From homespun kitchens, you drift onward into the public face of food, restaurants, cafes, and street vendors. The early 1900s city doesn't just feed itself at home. It dines out, often cheaply, sometimes extravagantly. Here's your historical fact. The American restaurant industry was transforming in the early 20th century, with lunchrooms and diners appearing in cities to serve the working class. These establishments offered affordable meals quickly, often in long communal halls where workers lined up at counters. Picture a lunchroom at noon. The sound of clattering dishes, spoons tapping bowls, men in flat caps hunched over plates of stew and pie. For 5 or 10 cents, you could eat a filling meal, then hurry back to the factory floor. The food was plain, but the price and speed made it irresistible. Meanwhile, wealthier patrons flocked to elegant hotels and restaurants, where menus listed oysters, roast beef, and champagne. Here, service was slow, portions large, and tablecloths starched stiffly enough to stand on their own. The gap between a nickel lunch and a $5 feast stretched as wide as the gulf between social classes. An obscure tidbit. In New York, pushcart vendors sold pickles by the spear, often straight from briny barrels. The streets smelled strongly of vinegar, and children would line up with pennies clutched in small hands. Some neighborhoods even had pickle alleys. Historians still debate whether the rise of cheap, mass-produced foods, like canned goods and processed bread, was liberating for women, who spent less time cooking, or whether it subtly eroded culinary traditions that had long tied families together. Your humor here: the first fast food joints of the era bragged about serving meals in under 5 minutes. Today, we sigh dramatically if a drive-through takes longer than 3. Humanity has always been impatient when hungry. The restaurants hum with clatter and chatter, and you drift between tables unnoticed, a ghostly diner sampling the air. Each plate tells a story of class, culture, and convenience, and the aroma of fried onions lingers long after you leave. You leave the warmth of kitchens and lunchrooms and step back into the wider city, where the rhythm of life is set not by bells or birds but by the factory whistle. Its metallic cry splits the morning air, summoning thousands to work. You join the stream of laborers, moving shoulder to shoulder with men, women, and children, their boots clattering across cobbled streets. Here's your historical fact. By the early 1900s, nearly 18% of the American workforce was made up of children under the age of 16, many of them working in mills, coal mines, and factories. Their small hands were considered useful for delicate or dangerous tasks, convenient for the owners, less so for the children missing fingers. Inside the textile mill, the air is thick with cotton dust that settles in lungs, coating the throat with grit. Machines roar, clattering endlessly, drowning out conversation. You watch a 12-year-old boy tie a broken thread, his eyes drooping with fatigue. Beside him, a girl no older than 10 runs bobbins, her hair tucked under a scarf. Obscure tidbit. Some factories hired children specifically to crawl under moving machinery to clear jammed threads. The role was grimly nicknamed a doffer, a small hand in a big machine, an image you'd rather not linger on. Historians still debate whether early progressive reformers truly improved workers' conditions or whether new labor laws simply shifted exploitation into less visible places. Here's your humor: dark, but necessary. The company motto might as well have been, "We don't offer dental, but we do offer soot in unlimited quantities." Not exactly the perks modern HR brags about. The day stretches long, measured not in hours but in the shriek of whistles that divide shifts. You see women standing on aching feet at looms, their dresses coated with lint, while men haul coal until their backs bend like bows. Breaks are short, wages meager, and accidents frequent. And yet, beneath the drudgery, there is a strange resilience. Workers share food during short rests, whisper jokes over the roar of machinery, and dream of weekends when parks and dance halls await. You leave the factory behind with the ringing of iron still echoing in your ears. You follow those echoes into the streets, where the murmur of discontent grows louder than the machines. Strikes, marches, and picket lines thread through the early 1900s like a second heartbeat of the city. Here's your historical fact. In 1911, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in New York killed 146 workers, most of them young immigrant women, and galvanized the labor movement, leading to new safety laws. Doors locked from the outside had sealed their fate. You walk beside protesters carrying placards demanding shorter hours, better pay, safer shops. Their voices rise in chants, cracking the city's usual rhythm of horse hooves and trolley bells. Women lead many of these marches, their skirts brushing the cobblestones as they stride forward, demanding recognition not just as workers but as citizens. An obscure tidbit: some striking workers would bring brass bands to picket lines, turning protests into noisy parades of resistance. Nothing unsettles a factory owner quite like the sound of a tuba outside his office window. Historians still debate whether labor victories of the early 20th century were won by sheer worker courage or by political convenience. Reforms often came when unrest threatened to spill over entirely. Your humor here: if you've ever rolled your eyes at a boring HR seminar about safety first, remember that it was preceded by an era when safety last was the unofficial rule. A hard hat wasn't even in the imagination yet. The marches swell and fade, sometimes met with cheers, sometimes with batons. But in every chant, every step, there is a stubborn insistence that life can be better than smoke and soot, that wages can stretch beyond bread and coal. You move with them, caught in the wave of protest and hope, until the sound dissolves into the evening quiet. The factory gates close behind you, and for once you're not following tired feet back to tenements but toward something gentler: leisure. Yes, even in the early 1900s, Americans carved out spaces to breathe between shifts, though leisure often looked different than it does for you now. You step into an amusement park on Coney Island, where laughter mixes with the faint salt of the Atlantic breeze. Electric lights glow like fireflies strung across wooden boardwalks, and music drifts from calliopes. For a moment, the smell of fried food almost hides the scent of smoke and sweat that clings to the city. Almost. Here's your historical fact. By 1904, Coney Island had Luna Park and Dreamland, early amusement parks powered by thousands of electric bulbs, so dazzling that some visitors thought they were stepping into the future. Electricity itself was a spectacle. Couples stroll in their Sunday best, men in straw hats and women in long skirts swishing like waves. Roller coasters clatter, Ferris wheels creak, and barkers shout promises of the ride of your life, though life insurance sold separately would have been the honest slogan. An obscure tidbit: one of the sideshow attractions in early 20th century amusement parks was literally watching babies in incubators. Yes, doctors demonstrated the miracle of science by displaying premature infants to paying crowds. Equal parts medical innovation and, let's admit it, deeply uncomfortable showmanship. Historians still debate whether amusement parks were truly democratic spaces of shared joy, or whether class divisions remained hidden under the glow of electric bulbs. Not everyone could afford the ticket, after all. Your humor for the night. Imagine explaining to a 1905 thrill-seeker that one day people would ride roller coasters virtually on their couches while eating pizza delivered by an app. Their heads would spin faster than the ride itself. You watch families scatter across rides, lovers sneak glances in the midway glow, and children clutch candy that will dissolve into sticky disaster on their best clothes. For a moment it feels timeless, the human need to laugh, to play, to forget for a while that work whistles wait for tomorrow. The lights of Coney Island fade behind you, and the night deepens. Streets grow quieter, windows dim one by one, and the city finally exhales. It is here, in the quiet, that the early 1900s show you a softer side. You walk past porches where families sit after supper, rocking in chairs as the evening air cools. A father reads aloud from a newspaper, his voice steady. A mother darns socks with gentle rhythm. Children chase fireflies, their laughter floating like lanterns into the dusk. The city has its noise, but the suburbs and small towns keep their hush. Here's your historical fact. By 1910, over half of American households still lacked indoor plumbing, so fetching water from pumps or wells remained a nightly ritual before bed. The hum of modern convenience had not yet reached most homes. An obscure tidbit: some families believed leaving a window open at night invited illness called night air. Ironically, fresh air probably would have been the healthiest thing they could invite indoors. Historians still debate whether family life in this era was as wholesome as nostalgic memory suggests, or whether nostalgia has simply smoothed over hardship with rose-colored varnish. Your humor, gently placed. Bedtime then didn't include just one more episode, but it did include children pleading for just one more story. Some things never change, only the screen got bigger. You hear crickets, the creak of rocking chairs, the hush of night settling. The glow of oil lamps flickers behind curtains, then vanishes as wicks are pinched out. The world slows, and so must you. Now let's bring our story to its close. The streets are hushed now, wrapped in the soft dark of an early 20th century night. The factory whistles have gone silent, the amusement lights are extinguished, and all that remains is the steady, comforting rhythm of life winding down. You feel the cool breeze on your skin, carrying the faint sense of coal smoke, bread ovens, and fresh night air. Imagine yourself on a wooden porch, rocking gently as the boards creak beneath you. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks once, then settles back into sleep. A lantern's glow flickers and fades, leaving only the silvery wash of moonlight across rooftops and fields. Families inside their homes breathe in unison, drifting into the kind of rest earned by long, demanding days. Your thoughts slow with the rhythm of that rocking chair, each sway carrying you deeper into calm. The noise of the city, the laughter of amusement parks, the clamor of protests, all of it dissolves into memory, softened by distance. What remains is simple: the quiet hum of crickets, the whisper of trees, the steady beat of your own breath. The early 1900s, for all their grime and grit, held these small moments of peace. Porch at dusk, a child drifting off to a lullaby, a community falling silent under the same sky. You are part of that picture now, just another figure in the stillness, another breath in the night air. And so, as the rocking chair slows, you let go of the day. Let the hush of history wrap around you, as comforting as a quilt passed down through generations. The story has ended, but the night continues. Rest, drift, and dream.